Good afternoon, Year 8, and welcome to the second lesson in the travel writing module. And without further ado, I'd like you to do the do now. Name as many famous places and sites and landmarks in London as you can. You don't have to have seen them, just that you know about. I'll give you 4 minutes to do that. Okay, I wonder how many you got. I'm sure some of you got, 15 or 18. I'd love to see them. But of course we can't because we're not in the same place. But you'll be sending me some work hopefully that you're doing later. Anyway, for now, our learning objective is to identify and compare two types of travel writing. Comparison is a skill that you need in your GCSE. So that's why we're doing this today. So your title that goes into your books is Comparing Two Types of Travel Writing. Okay, I just want you to think about the following questions. Have you ever been to London? Some of you will have been and some of you won't. I'm sure you've seen it on the television and so on and possibly read about it. So if you have been there, what did you see? And if you haven't and you've only read about it or heard about it, what have you read and heard about? And did you enjoy it, hearing about London or going to London? What were the positive and negative points for you? Just want to write a brief paragraph there with one positive aspect of going to London and one negative aspect of going to London. And when you've done that, go on to the next slide. Okay, we've got two types of travel writing coming up. Remember the mind map we did the other day with all the different types of travel writing on it. I want you to see if you can identify what type of travel writing this first one is, and also make a couple of notes about what does it tell us about London. Just write down two things that it tells us about London, and write down what audience do you think it's aimed at. Who do you think the writer would like to read this? Okay, here's the first piece of travel writing we're looking at today. While I read it, I want you to pick out a couple of things that it tells us about London, two things that it tells us about London, and what audience do you think it's aimed at? Who do you think the person who's writing this would like to read this? So here we go, I'll read it for you. Goodness me, but isn't London big? It seems to start about 20 minutes after you leave Dover and just goes on and on. Mile after mile of endless grey suburbs with their wandering ranks of terraced houses and stuccoed semis that always look more or less identical from a train, as if they've been squeezed out of a very large version of one of those machines they use to make sausages. How, I always wonder, do all the millions of occupants find their way back to the right boxes each night in such a complex and anonymous sprawl? Victoria Station was swarming with the usual complement of lost-looking tourists, lurking touts and passed-out drunks. I can't remember the last time I saw anyone at Victoria who looked like he was there to catch a train. On my way out, 3 separate people inquired whether I had any spare change. No, but thank you for asking, which wouldn't have happened 20 years ago. Then, not only were panhandlers something of a novelty, but they always had a good story about having lost their wallet and desperately needing £2 to get to Maidstone to donate bone marrow to their kid's sister or something. But now they just flatly ask for money, which is quicker but less interesting. I do find London exciting, much as I hate to agree with that tedious old git Samuel Johnson, and despite the pompous imbecility of his famous remark about when a man is tired of London he is tired of life, an observation exceeded in fatuousness only by a let a smile be your umbrella, I can't dispute it. After 7 years of living in the country in a sort of place where a dead cow draws a crowd, London can seem a bit dazzling. I can never understand why Londoners fail to see that they live in the most wonderful city in the world. It is far more beautiful and interesting than Paris, if you ask me, and more lively than anywhere but New York, and even New York can't touch it in lots of important ways. It has more history, finer parks, a livelier and more varied press, better theatres, more numerous orchestras and museums, leafier squares, safer streets, and more courteous inhabitants than any other large city in the world. And it has more congenial small things, incidental civilities you might call them, than any other city I know. Cheery red pillar boxes, drivers who actually stop for you on pedestrian crossings, lovely forgotten churches with wonderful names like St Andrew by the Wardrobe and St Giles Cripplegate, sudden pockets of quiet like Lincoln's Inn and Red Lion Square, interesting statues of obscure Victorians in togas, pubs, black cabs, double-decker buses, helpful policemen, polite notices, people who will stop to help you when you fall down or drop your shopping, benches everywhere. What other great city would trouble to put blue plaques on houses to let you know what famous person once lived there, or warn you to look left or right before stepping off the curb? I'll tell you, none. Okay, we just read that piece. Pick two things out that it tells us about London, write them down, and what audience is it aimed at? Who do you think the writer would like to read that? Who's he aiming that piece of writing at? Um, okay, and then when you've done that, we will go on and read the next piece of travel writing and do the same thing with that. And here it is. I'll read it, so read along with me. Remember, you're thinking of two things that it tells us about London, and who is this piece of writing? More importantly, really, because there's loads of information about London in there, who's it aimed at? Hello London, 24th to 31st of January. There is heaps to see in London, so we spent our few days here seeing the sights and checking out all the stuff that you see on TV all the time. Using the underground is like a huge Monopoly game, Victoria, Whitehall, etc. And everything's real, iconic red telephone boxes, double-decker buses, English pubs. So we've checked out the main stuff, Buckingham Palace, Big Ben. We went up the London Eye, up the Tower Bridge, and we checked out the Tower of London, had a look at the Crown Jewels. We also went and had a look at Westminster, which is their House of Parliament. We went to have a look inside so we followed the visitors sign in, and we ended up going through security, got passes, and ended up in the public gallery of the House of Commons in a parliamentary debate, which ended up being pretty boring, so we only stayed for about 2 minutes. We did get to stand on the spot that King Charles I got condemned to death, and William Wallace Braveheart as well. Later on we checked out the banqueting hall, which is one of the remaining parts of Whitehall Palace built by King Henry VIII, and coincidentally where the sentence of beheading Charles I got carried out. So after a few days in London, we made our way to Heathrow for our flights to Cairo. We had a 10-day tour and Nile cruise booked. So we were sitting at the gate about 5 minutes before boarding, and the flight got cancelled due to the rioting over there. Bummer. However, it was at the stage when the protests were just starting, so they said we might get to Egypt the day after. By bad luck, Renton had taken his tranquilizers because he's scared of flying, about 2 minutes before they made the announcement. So after 3 postponed flights and 2 nights in a 5-star hotel, courtesy of British Airways, and 3 meals in the hotel, it was a really hard time, we decided to give up on Egypt as the protests were out of control and the pyramids and museums were shut, so our travel agent recommended that we went to Dubai instead. More about that in the next blog. Well, I mean, that's not very well written, is it? There's lots wrong with that, but it's a certain style of writing. So what did you learn about London from that? 2 things. And who do you think it's aimed at? What type of writing is that? Now, I want you to write down 2 ways you think in which the texts are similar and 2 ways in which they are different. And here's one that I've picked out for you. They both give very personal views of London. They're both first-person narratives, very subjective, that means. It's just literally just that person's view. And the difference is the blog, the second one we read, so I've just given away told you rather what the second one is. It's a blog. It uses slang to appeal to its audience. Okay, I've picked out some aspects of the travelogue, which is what the first one was, that you can use in your comparison in a bit. It's got lots of personal opinion and feelings and reactions. It's got longer, more detailed paragraphs. It's got interesting descriptions and advanced vocabulary. It's written properly. It may be a first person, very subjective account, but it's actually written very properly. It's got rhetorical questions and a conversational style. So write those down. You're going to need those. The blog, however, has very informal language. Obviously, I'd imagine it's kind of written on a phone as the person's walking about. Very informal language, slang. It does have some personal photos, or as you can see there. And it's writing about its own personal experiences, not to promote the place in any way. So there we are. There's some similarities and differences. Right now, year 8, here's the task. You're going to write a couple of comparative paragraphs. You want to write a comparative paragraph explaining the different uses of language in each of the passages. And I've given you a couple of sentence starters there. In the London blog, the writer uses some non-standard English to describe London. Then you would show the non-standard English, and then you would use a comparative connective, possibly. However, in Notes from a Small Island, Bryson uses longer, more complex sentences to describe England, making his writing more descriptive. So you've got sentence starters for your first paragraph there. Remember, when you're comparing, to use comparative connectives, and they are things like whereas, on the other hand, however, and so on. I'd like you to write 3 paragraphs, please. So there you are, Year 8. Something for you to do there, and as ever, I would love to see your work. Seriously, the email address is on class charts. I'll put it back on the. In fact, I'll go back and I'll put it on the first slide of the presentation as well. And all this goes onto YouTube as well. The link is on class charts. So good luck with that, and I will see you. I will see you on Friday. So enjoy, and I'll see you on Friday. And send me some work if you can. I know it's not possible for all of you to do that, but if you can, then I'd love to see it.